A woman like you touching crystal? Disgraceful. That's what he said. Not in English. Not in a language most people in that room would understand. But Naomi did. He said it in Arabic, with a smirk, thinking he was clever. Thinking he was safe. The billionaire sat back, sipping his $5,000 bottle of Bordeaux, surrounded by other elites too drunk on power to care how cruel they sounded. The laughter hit like a slap. Sharp, deliberate, polished with expensive wine and ugly privilege. Naomi Price, 26, standing in her plain black server uniform, didn't flinch. She didn't spill the wine. She didn't break the glass. She just looked up. And with flawless pronunciation, in Arabic smoother than his own, she said, "The crystal does not disgrace the hand that holds it. It only reflects the dignity of the one who drinks from it." Silence. Chairs creaked. Forks hovered. The smirks died on their lips. That one sentence flipped the entire room on its head. What happened next would go viral, shake reputations, and prove that black stories like Naomi's aren't background noise, to the truth waiting to erupt. She wasn't just a waitress. She was a Georgetown graduate. A former cultural analyst for the U.S. State Department. A caregiver to a disabled younger brother. A woman with fire in her spine and a storm in her silence. This isn't just a comeback story. This is a reckoning. If you've ever been underestimated, if someone ever looked at your skin or your job or your clothes and decided your worth, this story is for you. This is for every black woman who's ever had to bite her tongue to keep a paycheck. Every person who's had to shrink so others could feel tall. So take 2 seconds, hit that like button, drop a quick comment if it stirs something in you. Not for clicks. For visibility. For voice. Because stories like this one, they deserve to be seen. This isn't just any story. This is a black story. And it's time the world listened. Let's begin. Naomi Price was the kind of woman people noticed without understanding why. She didn't wear makeup. Her uniform was the same plain black as every other server in the restaurant. No designer earrings, no glittering smile. But still, when she walked into a room, something shifted. Maybe it was the way she carried herself. Her spine always straight, her steps measured, like she had memorized the map of the world and knew exactly where she stood on it. Naomi was 26. Her skin was a warm shade of cocoa, smooth and glowing under the soft lighting of the restaurant. Her hair, pulled into a tight bun, showed off the sharp lines of her jaw and the steady focus in her eyes. She was beautiful, but not the kind of beauty that begged to be looked at. Hers was the kind that made you wonder who she was. Born in Baltimore, Naomi was adopted at age 6 by a linguistics professor who had spent 2 decades living and working in the Middle East. Dr. Evelyn Price raised her on Arabic poetry and political theory instead of cartoons and fairy tales. Their apartment was always filled with books, candles, and the smell of cumin and cinnamon from Evelyn's cooking. By 17, Naomi spoke 3 languages fluently: English, Arabic, and French. She later graduated from Georgetown University with a degree in Middle Eastern Studies and a minor in economics. She had once walked the marble floors of embassies, taken notes during state meetings, and translated sensitive documents for American officials. But that was before her younger brother was diagnosed with cerebral palsy. Before her adoptive mother's stroke left them without a second income. Before the loan default notice arrived in the mail. Now, Naomi worked night shifts at Glass Sky, a luxury rooftop restaurant in Manhattan, where she earned just enough to keep her brother's care covered and the lights on back home. She didn't complain. This wasn't where she thought she'd be, but it was where she needed to be. Every glass she poured, every plate she balanced, every insult she swallowed, it was all for her family. She didn't wear her story on her sleeve. She didn't explain herself to strangers. But if you looked closely, you'd see it. In her eyes. In her silence. In her strength. Naomi wasn't just a server. She was surviving. And she was about to make the world remember her name. The restaurant was called Glass Sky. It hovered on the 70th floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, its walls made of glass from floor to ceiling, offering a full panoramic view of the city lights blinking below. Inside, the glow was warm but controlled. Every detail had been curated to impress. Brushed gold fixtures, velvet chairs, stemware so fine it sang when touched. But what struck Naomi every time she stepped into that room wasn't the view or the decor. It was the weight in the air. It wasn't heat or humidity. It was power. And the people who knew they had it. Tonight, the private dining room was reserved for a post-conference gathering. A closed-door celebration for billionaires, politicians, and influencers who had just spent the day talking about global cooperation and economic equity, before retreating into velvet rooms to laugh at the people who couldn't afford bottled water. At the head of the table sat Khalid al-Rashid, a billionaire oil magnate from Qatar. He was a man who wore his silence like armor and his money like a weapon. Tall, broad, impeccably dressed in a designer suit that probably cost more than Naomi made in 2 months. Beside him sat Amira, his much younger second wife, with flawless makeup and a diamond choker that shimmered like ice. She barely spoke, but her eyes scanned the room like she was counting who mattered and who didn't. Further down the table was Senator Jack Benson, a career politician from New York, known more for his golf handicap than his voting record. His laugh came too easily, too loud, especially when he thought no one important was listening. Next to him, Rob Fields, the Hollywood producer with a reputation for making headlines, not movies. His tuxedo was tight around the middle, his ego larger than the table. There was also Alana Pierce, a social media influencer whose fame came from being photographed with powerful men and saying almost nothing of substance. Her phone never left her hand, her smile never quite reached her eyes. These were the guests Naomi was expected to serve, to keep their wine full and their plates warm, to be invisible until spoken to, and silent even then. But Naomi felt their eyes long before she reached the table, sizing her up, reading her uniform like it was a price tag. They did not know her, but they thought they did, and that made all the difference. Naomi moved with practiced precision. She approached the table with a tray balanced on one hand, each wine glass catching the low light like a piece of fire. Her face was calm, her posture steady, her footsteps soundless on the polished floor. She had done this 100 times before. But tonight, something was different. As she leaned in to pour Khalid's wine, a single drop escaped the lip of the bottle and landed on the white linen tablecloth. Just one drop. No splash, no stain, just a quiet dot soaking into the fabric. Khalid looked down at it. His expression didn't change, but his voice cut through the hum of the room like a knife. He spoke in Arabic. "A woman like you touching crystal. Disgraceful." The words were casual, almost lazy, meant to be unnoticed by the untrained ear. But the chuckle that followed was deliberate, loud enough for the others to hear without understanding. Naomi paused. She didn't react. Not yet. The producer, Rob, raised an eyebrow, amused even though he didn't understand the language. "What did he say?" he asked, grinning. Khalid shrugged, still in Arabic. "Just making an observation. Nothing worth translating." Amira smirked behind her glass. Alana giggled, leaning closer to Senator Benson. Naomi stepped back, eyes down, setting the bottle back on the tray. It was the kind of moment meant to be forgotten. A quiet jab dressed in another language. A private insult thrown in public without consequence. And Naomi was expected to let it pass. Just smile and move on. But the weight of it sat heavy on her chest. She had heard worse. Lived through worse. Still, something about that night. About the way the laughter spread like a ripple through the table. The way Khalid barely looked at her like she was less than the linen he dined on. It stayed with her. The senator leaned back, eyes flicking to her uniform. Must be hard, keeping your balance in those cheap shoes. More laughter. Naomi's lips pressed into a thin line. Her hands stayed steady. But her silence was starting to shift. Not all storms make noise when they arrive. Some begin in silence, then speak when it matters most. Naomi stood still for a moment longer than usual. She adjusted the tray in her hands, lifted her eyes just slightly, and looked directly at Khalid. Not with defiance. Not with anger. But with clarity. Her voice, when it came, was soft but unmistakable. In perfect Arabic, she said, "The crystal does not disgrace the hand that holds it. It only reflects the dignity of the one who drinks from it." It took the table a second to realize what had just happened. The room fell silent. The hum of conversation from nearby tables disappeared like someone had flipped a switch. Forks paused midair. Glasses stopped mid-sip. Khalid blinked. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Amara's expression tightened, her hand frozen over her napkin. Rob let out a breath that sounded like a laugh, except it had no amusement in it. The senator shifted uncomfortably in his seat, glancing at Alana, who now looked at Naomi with something closer to disbelief than mockery. Naomi did not break eye contact. She stood there in her plain uniform, in a room designed to make people like her feel invisible, and spoke words that cracked through years of arrogance and assumption. Her Arabic was not just fluent. It was polished, elegant, the kind of speech that came not from memorization but from lived experience. She pronounced every syllable with purpose, with history behind it. Someone near the end of the table whispered, "Did she just speak Arabic?" A man in a dark blazer, one of the quieter guests, leaned forward. That was classical structure, like something from Al-Mutanabi or Al-Rumi. Khalid cleared his throat, trying to laugh it off. A few rehearsed lines. That is all. But his voice was thinner now. His confidence shaken. Naomi did not speak again. She did not need to. Her silence after the sentence echoed louder than anything she could have said. She adjusted the glass on the table, bowed her head slightly, and turned to leave the circle of tension she had just set fire to. But the damage was done. The story had changed. The room had shifted. And no one could pretend otherwise. Because now, she was not just the waitress in black. She was the woman who made the richest man in the room go quiet. With nothing but words. The room was still reeling. Naomi had spoken a single sentence, but it felt like she had turned the table upside down. Khalid sat rigid, the muscle in his jaw tight, the easy arrogance that once coated his every word now cracking around the edges. He was not used to being challenged. And certainly not by someone like her. He leaned back, adjusted his cufflink, and spoke again in Arabic, but louder this time, performative. "Impressive pronunciation," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "But parrots can mimic poetry too. Tell me, since you seem so educated, what are your thoughts on the Qatar Energy Accord and its impact on non-OPEC trade partners?" A few guests chuckled, not out of humor, but relief. They thought she was cornered. It was a loaded question, full of technical jargon, intended to trip her, intended to remind her of her place. Naomi's expression didn't change. She set the tray gently on the side table and turned to face him. There was no hesitation in her voice. In 2021, Qatar finalized a multi-billion-dollar LNG deal with South Korea, adjusting its supply chain routes to bypass certain OPEC logistics, she said in Arabic. This positioned Doha as a stronger independent player, but also exposed them to trade instability in the Asia-Pacific region. Non-OPEC partners, especially Japan and India, responded by shifting their focus to hybrid energy contracts. It forced a recalibration of price guarantees across multiple export models. She paused for a second, just enough to let the weight of her words land. Your country's policy shift also impacted U.S. partnerships, especially through delayed port processing in Texas and Louisiana. The ripple effect affected trade valuations for at least 3 fiscal quarters. No one laughed this time. The senator slowly placed his wine glass down. Rob scratched his neck and looked away. Even Alana, who rarely understood anything that didn't trend online, leaned forward with wide eyes. Khalid blinked, visibly thrown. He opened his mouth but said nothing. Naomi finished her sentence and stood still. No smugness. No raised voice. Just the quiet power of someone who knew exactly what she was talking about. Someone who had once sat at the very tables these men now occupied, and left not because she failed, but because she had seen too much. The silence that followed was not empty. It was loaded. Because they now realized this was no accident. They hadn't just underestimated her. They had misjudged the entire game. Naomi stood quietly as the last echo of her words faded. She didn't expect applause. She didn't need validation. But the silence in the room told her everything. They were beginning to see her, truly see her, for the first time. But what they still didn't know was why she was here. Why a woman who spoke fluent Arabic, who broke down global energy trade deals like a policy advisor, was standing in front of them wearing an apron and serving wine. It was Senator Benson who finally asked, his voice low but curious. "Where did you study?" Naomi looked at him, steady as ever. "Georgetown. Class of 2019. Middle Eastern Studies and Economic Policy." A few eyebrows lifted. Even Khalid's mouth tightened. "I interned at the U.S. Embassy in Jordan," she continued, her voice calm, matter of fact. "Then joined a State Department think tank focused on regional trade and linguistic diplomacy. I spent 2 years in Amman. Another in Doha." Rob blinked. "You worked in diplomacy?" "I did," she said simply. She didn't elaborate. She didn't explain how she once stood behind closed doors, helping draft statements for American diplomats, or how her translations had shaped conversations between oil executives and U.S. ambassadors. She didn't talk about the conference in Geneva where she delivered an unscripted Arabic response that earned her a standing ovation. None of that mattered now. Because what brought her here wasn't failure. It was principle. 1 year ago, Naomi discovered a leak inside the very think tank she worked for. A senior advisor was feeding policy briefs to private contractors with oil ties, including one tied to Khalid's enterprise. When she raised concerns, she was told to keep quiet, to focus on her role and not ask questions. But Naomi asked anyway. And just like that, doors began to close. Her clearance was quietly revoked. Job offers vanished. Calls stopped being returned. Within 3 months, she went from policy rooms to restaurant floors. Not because she lacked talent, but because she refused to play along. Naomi never blamed the system. She knew how the world worked. But she also knew who she was. That was the difference. So when Khalid tried to reduce her to nothing more than a waitress with a spill and a silent face, he made a mistake. He forgot that not every fall is failure. And not every silence is surrender. The weight of Naomi's past was just beginning to sink in around the table. She could feel it, the shift in their posture, the questions hanging in the silence, the way some guests now avoided her eyes while others stared too long, trying to put her story together like a puzzle missing half its pieces. She wasn't done. Naomi reached into the small pocket of her apron. Her movements were slow, not dramatic, just intentional. What she pulled out was a single envelope, worn at the edges. The paper soft from time, but still intact. Still powerful. She held it with one hand, her voice even. "Most of you will forget what I said tonight by morning. That's fine. But there's one man at this table who already forgot me once." Her eyes turned to Khalid. He froze. Naomi opened the envelope and carefully unfolded the letter inside. It was cream-colored paper with a gold seal at the top, slightly faded but still legible. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She read aloud. To Naomi Price, recipient of the Al-Rashid Future Scholars Grant. Full academic coverage for undergraduate study, granted to students of exceptional merit pursuing diplomacy or international relations. Awarded and signed by Khalid Al-Rashid. She paused. The date is May 3, 2015. Gasps weren't loud, but they were there. The name. The signature. His seal. Khalid stared at the letter, as if seeing a ghost. His hand hovered over the tablecloth, fingers twitching like they might rise in protest, but no words came. Naomi looked at him, not with anger, but with knowing. "You sign a lot of letters," she said softly. "But some of us remember everyone." A quiet chill moved through the table. Amara shifted in her chair. Alana blinked fast, as if unsure whether to record or retreat. The senator leaned back slowly, the muscles in his jaw working as he processed what he had just heard. Naomi folded the letter again, as gently as she had opened it, and slid it back into the envelope. "I wouldn't be here if it weren't for that scholarship," she said. "And I'm not talking about this restaurant." Her words landed heavy. Khalid couldn't respond. Not with wit. Not with denial. His silence was not power now. It was exposure. Because somewhere between that letter and this dinner table, he had forgotten who he once helped. But Naomi had not. And now, neither had anyone else. The room didn't breathe. For a few seconds, the entire table sat suspended in quiet disbelief, like a balloon stretched too tight. Naomi stood calm, hands clasped in front of her, as if she hadn't just shattered every assumption they had built around her. But the silence wouldn't last. At the far end of the table, someone's phone buzzed. Then, another. It wasn't just the people in the room who had witnessed what happened. Someone, maybe a server, maybe a guest, had captured the moment Naomi responded in Arabic. Captured the moment she unfolded that scholarship letter. Captured the silence that followed. And they uploaded it. The clip hit social media within 20 minutes. A vertical video, a bit shaky, framed just right to see Naomi speaking with clarity, grace, and undeniable command. Her words, translated in captions, hit the internet like a live wire. By the time dessert was served at the table, the video had hit 500,000 views. By morning, it would pass 10 million. The internet didn't hesitate. Thousands of comments poured in. She shut him down with class. Smartest person in the room, and they laughed at her. This is the kind of black story we need to hear more of. Naomi's name started trending. Think pieces popped up overnight. Language experts weighed in, praising her fluency. Activists amplified her story. A few verified accounts confirmed the scholarship connection to Khalid, backing her with public records. Inside the dining room, the air changed. Alana discreetly tried to delete her earlier post, a selfie from the same table captioned with a mocking joke. But screenshots had already circulated. Rob, the producer, checked his phone and paled. His PR manager had texted 5 times. "Do not say another word. Walk away. Say nothing to press." The senator turned to Amara and whispered something tight, controlled. "Damage control. Optics." Khalid sat frozen. His hands were still on the table, but the power had slipped from them. He looked smaller now, the weight of exposure heavy on his shoulders. Naomi didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply collected the empty wine glasses from the table like it was any other night. But nothing about this night would be forgotten. Not by the guests. Not by the millions now watching. And not by Khalid al-Rashid, whose name had just become a global headline for all the wrong reasons. The fallout came faster than anyone expected. By the next morning, news outlets had picked up the story. Waitress stuns billionaire in Arabic, and reveals he once funded her future. That was the headline plastered across multiple digital front pages. Khalid al-Rashid's public relations team scrambled, issuing a vague statement about cultural misunderstandings and his long-standing support for educational access. But it was too late. The video spoke for itself. The tone, the arrogance, the silence that followed her reply. No amount of spin could clean it up. Within 48 hours, Khalid was removed from the board of one of the largest international education nonprofits. Sponsors began distancing themselves. He was scheduled to speak at a global summit on inclusive leadership. His name was pulled from the roster with no public explanation. Behind closed doors, donors pulled out. Clients hesitated. Partners stopped returning calls. He wasn't cancelled. Not in the dramatic, performative way people often fear. But he became quieter, less visible, less welcome. The ripple effect didn't stop with him. Rob Fields, the Hollywood producer known for his charm and controversy, saw one of his upcoming film deals fall apart. A major streaming platform released a statement noting they were reviewing all partnerships to ensure alignment with their core values. Insiders knew exactly what that meant. Senator Jack Benson faced criticism from both sides of the aisle. He hadn't said much that night, but he had laughed. And in politics, silence is often its own kind of endorsement. Advocacy groups called for an ethics review. His staff deleted several tweets. A fundraiser was abruptly postponed. Alana's brand deals began drying up. One by one, companies that once filled her inbox with offers went quiet. Her Instagram comments flooded with messages like, "Why didn't you speak up?" and "Deleting posts won't erase your silence." Even Amira, Khalid's wife, found herself under scrutiny, not for what she did, but for how she sat quietly, sipping her wine while another woman was publicly diminished. A silence that had once been interpreted as elegance now felt cold. None of them had expected this. They had lived for years in rooms where power protected them, where ridicule came easy and apology never followed. But this time, the world watched. And Naomi, without raising her voice, had shifted the ground beneath their feet. Naomi never asked to be seen. She had spent most of her adult life keeping her head down, doing the work, avoiding unnecessary noise. But after that night, after that video, there was no hiding. The requests came fast. Morning talk shows wanted to interview her. Online publications sent emails with subject lines like, "Heroine in heels," and "The woman who spoke truth to power." Language professors across the country cited her response as an example of cultural fluency and composure under pressure. One op-ed in a national paper simply read, "This is how dignity sounds." But Naomi didn't say yes to the spotlight. She declined every interview, turned down every offer for a sponsored platform. She didn't want to become a symbol. She just wanted her life back. Still, recognition found her in other ways. The restaurant where she worked saw a wave of new reservations. People came just to see if she was real. Some asked for her section, hoping to hear her speak. Others left thank you notes on receipts, folded bills with messages like, "For your grace," or "Thank you for standing tall." One afternoon, she found a small envelope at her locker. No name, just a note inside that read, "My daughter saw your video. She stood up to her teacher today. Thank you." She kept that one. Even her manager, a man known more for chasing 5-star reviews than human decency, pulled her aside. He didn't say much, just offered a raise and more control over her shifts. A quiet apology, masked as a business decision. But the moment that stayed with Naomi the most came from home. Her younger brother, Marcus, had seen the video. He didn't understand the politics. He didn't know what Qatar was or why people were talking about oil deals. But he watched his sister stand still, speak strong, and silence a room full of power. He sent her a voice message that night. "You are the bravest person I know," he said. "They couldn't see you before, but now the whole world does." Naomi sat with that message for a long time. Not out of pride, but peace. She didn't need a stage. She had already made her point. And she did it the way she always had, by choosing silence only when it served her, by speaking only when it mattered, and by never, ever forgetting who she was. Naomi's story was never about revenge. It was about remembrance. About the quiet kind of strength that doesn't seek attention, but cannot be ignored when it rises. She didn't change the world with a protest or a podium. She changed the world by standing still in the face of mockery, by holding her ground, by answering cruelty not with anger, but with truth. And sometimes, that's more powerful than anything else. Because the truth is, dignity doesn't shout. It whispers. It walks quietly through rooms that weren't built for it. It pours wine for people who think they're better. It listens. It waits. And when the moment is right, it speaks. Naomi reminded us that being underestimated is not a weakness. It's an opening, an invitation to surprise, to rise, to leave people stunned not with force, but with grace. There's a lesson in that. For every person who has been overlooked because of their job title, their skin, their background, for everyone who has swallowed 1,000 insults just to make it through the day, this is for you. You don't have to explain yourself to everyone. You don't have to prove anything to people who were never listening. But when the time comes, when your voice matters, you will know. And when you speak, let it be with clarity, with peace, with the kind of confidence that comes not from ego, but from knowing who you are. That is the power Naomi showed us. And it lives in you too. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever stood in a room where you were unseen, unheard, or unwelcome, leave a comment below. Tell your story. Or simply say, I've been there. Because someone else is reading. And maybe they need to know they're not alone. And if you want to hear more stories that remind us of who we are, and what we're capable of, hit that follow button. Not because it helps the channel, but because it helps us stay connected. One story at a time.